And we'll call this meeting to order. It's a special meeting of the Oversight Board for the Glendale Successor Agency. And may I have a roll call, please?
Board members of Carrion.
Here.
Barry. Here. Nakasone.
Here.
Ochoa.
Here.
Sheehan.
Here.
Steger.
Here.
And Chair Raggio.
Here. And a report of the Secretary, please.
The posting of the agenda for the December 19th, 2012 special meeting of the Glendale Oversight Board was posted on Thursday, December 13, 2012 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Next item.
Approval of minutes.
Do I hear a
So
motion?
moved. Second.
Roll call.
I'm sorry, who seconded? You first and second, okay.
And a roll call on that.
Board members of Carrion.
Yes.
Barry. Yes. Nakasone.
Yes.
Ochoa.
Yes.
Sheehan.
Yes.
Steger.
Yes.
And Chair Raggio.
Yes. Item 3.
Okay, and there's actually no informational items. At 4A is Director of Community Development regarding due diligence review, DDR, of redevelopment funds, non-housing. And at 4A1 is resolution to receive and convene a public comment session on the DDR.
Good afternoon, board members. If you recall, in October, you held 2 sessions, and the primary purpose of those 2 sessions was to review the account balances of the low and moderate income housing fund. And so you initially held a meeting and held a public comment session and came back later on to vote on the DDR. The same thing is happening again today and in January, and this time it's to review all of the account balances on the non-housing side. And so today we have a due diligence review that was conducted by the same firm that conducted the housing DDR, that's McGladrey. We have Peter George representing the firm. He was here and he can walk you through the DDR. But in short, the statutory requirement was for the auditor to look at the funds, all of the funds of the redevelopment agency as of June 30th, and determine which of those funds are legally restricted and need to be retained to make payments, and what's the available cash that does not need to be retained by the successor agency and can be paid out to the taxing entities. And so if we can open the public comment session and have Peter come up and go over the DDR. Before Peter starts, I would also like to bring something to the board's attention and also include it as part of the record. The DDR had to be submitted by December 15th, and so as we were putting together the DDR, we made some assumptions as of the date of preparation, and those assumptions now a week later have turned out to be incorrect. We've received revised or final determinations from the Department of Finance in regards to our ROPS 3 allocation, and so that has affected some of the numbers into DDR. We know you're coming back in January to take a look at this DDR and vote on it again, but in the meantime we will be reaching out to the Department of Finance to find out how they would like us to treat these revisions. We will certainly have McGladrey put in the new numbers, but we do want to get guidance from the Department of Finance. And so
Mr. Chairman, if I can add, Ms. Babolian said that the
Name for the record, sir?
I'm sorry, my name is Philip Lanzafame. I'm the Executive Officer for Economic Development and Asset Management for the City of Glendale. Ms. Babolian said that the assumptions are incorrect, and the reason they are is they were the best assumptions we had. We have now received final determination from the state, which will contradict those assumptions. We had to take a worst-case scenario. This is something that my guess is will affect every oversight board, every successor agency in the state, because we all had to prepare this document before the state made their final determinations. If the assumptions of a worst case were made and it's something better than that, the assumption has to be changed. And so that's where we all find ourselves in the same boat as my guess is every other agency in the state. Had the state really thought this through and said, the due diligence reviews are due even 1 week later, we wouldn't be having this hiccup. And again, I think every agency in the state is going to experience some part of this.
Well, we're
with
not
that-
subject to penalty now with respect to this delay.
Well, no, but we now need, the direction we need to get is, how do you want us to treat this? And Mr. George can talk to you about the fact that he has given an opinion based on the assumptions that we gave to him. This is how much we expect to get back from our funding request based on some recommendations made by the county and some initial determinations made by the state. Now we know that those recommendations by the county are not going to be fulfilled. They will still take some off from the state, and so our numbers are going to change.
So it's a matter of process then.
Matter of process.
All right.
May I ask just one quick question on that? So we knew, if I remember correctly from the meeting that we'd had previously, we knew that something like this was, we thought it was very likely to have happened because of the order in which they had set up the submittals, that we were submitting information before it was ever verified. So this shouldn't be any surprise, yeah?
It shouldn't be a surprise to the state. It's not a surprise to us. Unfortunately, the timing of this meeting, the timing of having to send all of our information, when we send information to you, we need to send that same information to the state and to the county. So best information we had at the time, when it was due last Friday, is what you have before you. We now know that those numbers need to change. Unfortunately, we need some direction from the Department of Finance on how to go about that, and we need to huddle with our auditors to look at the appropriate way to deal with that. And then by next month, we'll be able to have the proper number for you to consider. And my guess is we would even have that before it will
Does
go
that
out
mean
in
that,
packets.
that we still take action on what we have today?
Yes.
All right.
Because that is what is also required. And again, Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to continue to harp on the state, although they do continue
Go
to cause
right
me
ahead.
frustration.
Don't
We are
hold
trying
back.
to meet every deadline and regulation that they ask us to. We are put into this situation because of the hurried manner in which the law was written, and it wasn't thought all the way through, simple timing on this. We're all stuck in this same boat.
Microphone.
Today's action, the question was, so we approved this today, and then we know next month there's going to be a revision. Actually, the action today is just to take comment on this.
Oh,
It's
I got
the
it.
start of the review.
Okay.
We're giving you the first comment on this, in that we know the number will change. Unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what that number is until I get some direction from the Department of Finance, until I get some direction from the auditor on how best to handle this. And I don't know if council has anything more to add, but those conclude my preparatory comments. Mr. George can go through the procedures that we used and that were prescribed by the state of California for this activity. So if there's no other questions, I'll
Thank you.
leave it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, members of the Oversight Board. My name is Peter George. I'm a director with McGladdery, and this is my second time standing before you. I was in front of you, I think, on October 3rd, doing the first presentation for the housing fund, the low-mod income housing fund only. This is basically the same type of report, except it's now for the rest of the former redevelopment agency funds, except for the low-mod income housing fund. So basically, when I presented to you back on October 3rd, we kind of went through the background as to the creation of this, purpose of this agreed-upon procedures, and kind of the difference between a DDR and an agreed-upon procedures, and maybe just for the refreshment of the board members, kind of go through that process a little bit, and then maybe just kind of give you an overview as to what the procedures we actually performed were, and open up to any questions that you may have regarding this report. Basically, what happened with the creation of AB 1484, this resulted in the state wanting, I guess, some comfort in the records that were being provided to them, that they were basically matching the supporting documentation to general ledger and the records of the successor agency. And when they came out with this DDR, due diligence review, that's really a misnomer as far as what we in the accounting profession do, because that's not something an independent accountant can do. A due diligence review is not something that's in our language. So the profession went back with the state, and I want to say late August, around the 20th of August, the state came back with a set of procedures, which were called the suggested procedures, which are really what we consider agreed upon procedures, which is something we can do as in the profession under the attestation standards of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, or AICPA. So this report you have in front of you, which is very similar to the report that you had back on October 3rd, is what we call an agreed upon procedures report, but it basically meets the requirements of the Health and Safety Code for this due diligence review. So having said that, they came out on August with a set of procedures, which I have a copy of here. And these procedures are basically enumerated inside this report. That's like the first 10 paragraphs you see here. And then there's a bunch of schedules that support those procedures or a result of those procedures. So basically the long and short of it is that we've performed all the requested procedures by the Department of Finance, agreed to by the Successor Agency, and there was no findings as a result of the procedures performed. I wasn't going to go through and actually read procedure by procedure, but if there's any questions any of the members may have, I'd be happy to answer that.
Well, where within the 10 or 11 procedures do they take exception?
If we didn't find something that agreed, for example, if we were provided a schedule, basically in a nutshell what this is we are supposed to do certain things given what they was requested of us. So for example, we were provided a listing of assets or we're provided a listing of transfers. There's some things we have to do with that listing, either agreeing to certain underlying documentation, say the underlying accounting records, or agreeing to certain enforceable obligations support, whether it's an agreed contract, something that is executed. If we ended up getting a list and we didn't find that there was an underlying accounting record to support that, for example, or something was being claimed as a supported legally enforceable obligation, but there was nothing to enforce it, we would have some exceptions listed in our procedure saying we didn't get everything we needed or we didn't see everything we needed to see. And in that case, we didn't have anything like that.
Ask a question? So this is very similar, if not the same, as what we've seen.
Exactly. Same procedures that was done back in October for the low-mod income housing fund, but this is not for the low-mod income housing fund. This is for the rest of the former redevelopment funds.
And then maybe more for the staff. We got the response back on the ROPS, correct? What was different from what was left out on the ROPS according to the state? The state say that the successor agency, former redevelopment agency, did not have adequate backup documentation for, so they're disallowing it.
There was a number of items that the ROPS 3 determination letter denied, and do you want me to read what those?
The highlights. What were the larger?
Maybe if I can offer, what we believe we provided to the Department of Finance, very similar to what we provided to the auditors, was all that underlying documentation. What we received back was, we don't think it's an enforceable obligation. Not a real reason why.
As to how much, though? How much money?
About $3 million. About $3 million that we asked for on our ROPS that they approved. $3 million less.
And are those like administrative, copiers, staff?
Some of those are administrative. Some of those are legal fees. Some of those are things like some of the I'm not sure how to categorize them. I would say administrative type expenses. However, they're listed in the law as enforceable obligations. Your rent, your copy machines, the counsel that for the projects that you're implementing, those types of things. And some of those they've said we don't think they're enforceable obligations.
Was there any debt service?
Sorry?
Debt service?
There was no debt service. What I would call your traditional debt service of bonds. However, there was some on a loan that the Housing Authority took, implementing the redevelopment agency's obligation to use 20% dollars for low and moderate income housing that they denied, and that specifically, the agreement specifically calls for the security and the repayment of that loan to be made with 20% set aside.
How much is that?
It's about $1.5 million.
So of the $3 million they disallowed, $1.5 million is represented by a loan to somebody?
Yes.
So somebody's not going to get $1.5 million.
Somebody's not going to get $1.5 million.
Have we sent them a Christmas card?
I'm sorry.
Who is it?
It's, can we say?
Union.
It's Union Bank. Union Bank had made a loan so that we could undertake a housing project to the Housing Authority. Again, the Housing Authority, long-time arrangement that they would implement the agency's obligations to use their 20% set-aside to create and promote and expand affordable housing. They were doing that for the redevelopment agency with the dollars that are set aside by the redevelopment agency, and the Department of Finance is just not recognizing it.
So, but Union Bank is likely to sue somebody then?
Well, I think
mean, you
it would
can't
be
speak
my
for them,
guess, Mr. Ochoa, that they would sue the city of Glendale, or the Glendale Housing Authority.
Why wouldn't they sue the state of California? It's the state of California that's disallowing it.
It's well, my guess is, now I'm getting into, I'm playing a lawyer in front, and I'm going to turn to Ms. Van Meiden to do that, because I'm getting a little bit out of my technical expertise.
Sure. Thanks, Phil. Mr. Chair, members of the Oversight Board, we can't predict, of course, exactly who Union Bank will sue, but certainly the obligation is the Housing Authority's obligation, and we can certainly ask if we are sued to include the Department of Finance within that lawsuit, because it is not a consequence of our not wanting to pay them. Our inability to pay them would be as a consequence of not receiving the money from the Department of Finance. So we would request them to be included as indispensable parties in that lawsuit. So I think potentially there would be a state involvement, and Union Bank can certainly choose to sue them as an indispensable party from the get-go. If they don't from the beginning, it's likely we may ask them to join our lawsuit as defendants.
Are other agencies having this kind of difficulty? Is this common with respect to the 400 agencies that have to report to the state?
I can speak to that, and I suppose also Ms. Mizrahi can speak to it as well. In my experience with the post-redevelopment working group, where I speak with any number of agency councils from across the state, this is not uncommon. Many of these problems are actually more complicated in some cities, but this is a fairly common problem, as Mr. Lanzafame pointed out. I'm certain other agencies are in the same position we are with our DDR timing. The findings on the ROPS coming after the reporting on the DDR, and there being a different number. So we'll be, in all likelihood, either independently or through the League of California Cities, a request will be made to the Department of Finance to issue some procedures to assist us with refining and revising the DDR, the non-housing DDR. It will absolutely be necessary statewide to do so. So this is not uncommon, and perhaps Ms. Mizrahi can speak further about it.
Well, at least I could speak from some personal experience in terms of some of the successor agencies that our firm represents. We are having some major problems, one specifically in the city of Victorville, and another specifically in the city of Desert Hot Springs. This is happening throughout the state of California, and we are behind the 8 ball, at least with respect to the successor agencies. They're absolutely behind the 8 ball. The state has placed successor agencies in, frankly, a tailspin downward. I mean, I don't know how to put it. We are constantly behind the 8 ball with respect to trying to get funding, trying to comply, and then funding being ripped away, and we're sitting there going, oh my goodness. So that's my 2 cents. It's unfortunate.
I don't understand why we wouldn't take a 8 or 10-month break until they sort out all these mess, so we kind of don't get together, make a decision, and then come back the next month and make a different decision. It seems like we should take a year break, come back next Christmas. Most of these things would have worked out all on its own, and then we'll do what we're asked to do, which is to do a job. But if we are given what we need until we know what all of the headaches and craziness that this has created is, I have no idea what any agency could ask us to do what we're supposed to do here. So my recommendation is to have as little amount of meetings as possible until next December. And I'm saying this with all seriousness. To have the minimum amount of meetings possible just have the amount of meetings that's mandatory under the law only. And I think that we don't need to get any other updates. I think ROPS are all done. And then at that point, then we can maybe get a little bit more updates, because it's really, to go have a monthly or bi-monthly meetings now with all these changes is really useless and it's a complete waste of time.
I certainly would second that, but with one question for legal counsel, because when this came out that the due diligence review was going to change, my question to legal staff was, do we even have to have this meeting today? Because why are we having a meeting to take public
Waste of
comment
time.
on something that's about to change? My understanding is that we have to, because that's what the law says.
Right.
So
The minimum we need to have to legally be bind, I don't have a problem. But to have any additional meetings that is not called for under the law, I think that would be a complete waste.
I fear most of our meetings would probably fall into that category, though. My sense.
I get what you're saying.
But the end result is that that's not going to happen. In that, I think the state is going to go on stumbling their way through, and it means that we're going to be the end of the whip no matter what, because we don't have any way of appealing this. And is there anybody up there that has an IQ that exceeds 70 so that you can literally talk to them? And I just, since we began this process, we have collectively become more and more
Confused.
not only confused, but also just simply frustrated by working with incompetence. And that's what I see up there, is an inability to lay out something and literally begin to work it through. What we're seeing right now is, I don't understand it, so you did it wrong. And send it back. And then we'll stumble through it again. So I guess we do that, and Albert, just thank everybody that we're not paid. So the end result is we're not feeding on the trough here. So, but I agree, we'll be discreet about when we call meetings.
At the risk of beating a dead horse, can I get one bit of clarification?
Yes.
On this Union Bank deal? As I looked at all those information in the ROPS, it seemed as though that particular item was very well documented, both in terms of precedent, that the Housing Authority had historically been the agent for the redevelopment agency that performed those housing duties. And it was, looking back, the documentation on the relationship was there, the documentation on the use of tax increment for the debt service was there. Did they give a rationale as to how or why that would now be disallowed?
If I may, Mr. Chair, members of the Oversight Board, no, they did not. And it is correct that we provided all the documentation showing that the Housing Authority undertook the obligation of the former redevelopment agency with respect to the 20% set-aside. So this reaction from the Department of Finance essentially ignores the obligations of the former redevelopment agency to use 20% of that money for low and moderate income housing. And in essence, it's a rewrite of former redevelopment law to ignore those obligations that are pre-existing and wiping them off the books as though that obligation never existed to begin with.
Well, I know that the representative from Union Bank had wanted to participate in the meet and confer session and then wasn't able to. Do they know that this has come out last week, didn't it? At the end of last week?
Actually, last night.
In fact, we got this yesterday, last night. And the logic isn't there in the letter that we received, but in trying to read the rationale, and this is something we want to clarify. Number one, the Department of Finance said, we don't recognize this as an obligation because it's not the redevelopment agency that's named on the agreement. Number one. And number two, it's secured by redevelopment set-aside, housing set-aside. That doesn't exist anymore. So it's taking what I believe is an obligation and the lender relying on that being there and saying, you know what, we get to change the terms. That thing, we don't recognize that thing anymore, 20%. Therefore, you don't have any security on this loan. And I think that's wrong.
That's wacky. At nighttime, you don't deny the existence of the sun.
Mr. Ochoa, I couldn't agree with you more. And that was the argument that we put forth in our meet and confer. The one thing that we've kind of danced around, or at least haven't really said up front, is this is a final determination. The law is set up so we don't have any other administrative recourse. The next is a lawsuit that somebody's going to file because there's $1.5 million that's owed this year.
And their reaction is a perfect setup for an impairment of contract claim.
Let me,
And can I follow one thing, going back to Mr. Abkarian's point then, to the extent, I mean, I am the representative from Glendale, but for other folks that aren't representing a public agency, or at least this particular public agency, if actions that we take as a body that approve documents like the ROPS, and somebody is harmed through an impairment of contract, like a union bank, what happens to these folks up here in terms, I mean, you're going to defend us, I'm guessing, because that lawsuit is coming, but is there a lawsuit against this body, or is there a lawsuit against the Housing Authority, or against the Successor Agency, or the City of Glendale?
Sorry about that. It's likely that Union Bank would sue the Successor Agency and probably the Housing Authority and probably the Oversight Board. It's likely that they would bring the Oversight Board in. And I think that we had kind of discussed this a little bit with respect to some Mona lease issues that came up prior. There's a huge debate, though, with respect to the liability of the Oversight Board. And
I think our lessons at the county indicated that we would not be liable.
that's exactly what I heard.
right. And I think that some of what we had spoken a little about before was that it's unlikely that the Oversight Board would be found, or would be held, I guess, I don't know about found, but will be held liable. And at least that's what we had spoken about prior. However, it's also likely that the Oversight Board would still have to defend, and it costs money, to defend the case. So it could be brought in, and then you would have to, the Oversight Board would be defending the case.
And the Successor Agency would be looking to dismiss them immediately. So we could minimize that as quickly as possible. And also in light of the record, which is that this Oversight Board approved that line item on the ROPS for payment with RPTTF. So it wouldn't be the instance where Union Bank is saying, and the Oversight Board disapproved this, when there is ample evidence that it is an enforceable obligation of the Successor Agency.
And I think simple
look
terms is you
well.
did everything you could in your power to pay that obligation. You have done everything that you possibly can that the law affords you to do that. And that's why we haven't conferred, but I'm sure that's why Ms. Van Muyden said we would seek to have the Oversight Board dismissed, because there's no action, no fault of yours.
So to Mr. Abkarian's point, is there any sense of taking any actions?
Well, I'm going to ask the question, if I might ask the question for you, there are penalties if we don't conduct these. What it may be is that it may just be that you look at this, you open the comment period, you see if there's any comment, we're giving you some comment, but after consultation with the auditor and with the Department of Finance, it may be that we leave this untouched, and it's through that review of the Department of Finance that they say, well, wait a minute, we didn't take that money away, so this number's incorrect, yes, we agree, and then it's changed by the Department of Finance, not this body. Those are the things that we just don't know. However, we're required to have this meeting to take comment on what has been prepared. We are also required to have something approved and sent to the Department of Finance by January 15th. And the penalties for failing to do that, I'm not quite sure.
$10,000 a day.
Something that we don't want, we don't think we need to do.
Can we put that
don't want
$10,000 a day on our ROPS and see if they approve it?
I guess the one comment that if I don't get a chance to come back and say it, I would leave with you now. I can sense your frustration. I know your staff has that frustration. We're asking you to merely carry out what the law prescribes, and it's going to be our direction, my direction to the staff, to meet every one of those deadlines that we can. However illogical it may seem, if that's what the state has ordered us to do, we want to be the compliant player in this game, and we will continue to do that. And I ask your indulgence, and I know your frustration, but I ask your indulgence in allowing us to carry on those mechanics.
Thank you, Phil. Is there any other discussion as to who the apparent foe is in this whole thing? Have we gone through this subject enough now? We're not taking action, and that means that no one else has comment within the audience because this is a public hearing.
The Oversight Board does have to do everything by resolution, so the resolution is to conduct a public comment session, so we would like to take a vote on that resolution.
I have a question. The Department of Finance had objections with the DDR that was submitted for housing funds. Since we use the same procedures, are we expecting similar objections on this review?
Yes, they did. There were some items that they initially disallowed. We asked for the meet and confer, and we, on Monday, just on Monday, got our response on that. They agreed with us on several of the items.
Sir, I think that for us to be in the loop, as little as there is, just so we're not in the dark, I think the letters from the Department of Finance coming in should actually be carbon copied to us as well. So we kind of get an idea as to, we come in and say there are some issues and we're in the dark as to what issues they're talking about. So the second time when he comes in again, we kind of know where the ball is.
And to the extent we can, we will. Literally, the housing DDR came in Monday. This second one came in
I understand
late
that.
last night.
I'm not saying on this one. I'm just saying.
Understand, and to the extent
Whenever
we can,
physically
we will.
possible. Sure.
Is there any further comment with respect to the audience in terms of this open hearing? Seeing none, the hearing is closed. And we need to take action on the resolution.
Correct.
And that'll be done by motion.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
And roll call, please.
Board members Abkarian?
Yes.
Berry?
Yes.
Nakasone?
Yes.
Ochoa?
Yes.
Sheehan?
Yes.
Steger?
Yes.
And Chair Raggio.
Yes. Motion approved. Next item.
Oral communications, and there were no cards submitted.
I do have a question. We received yesterday this memo from the Department of Finance giving a listing of the cities, and I take it's the cities in the county that we're talking to, and I don't understand what approved adjustment means versus proposed adjustment, and then I need a clarification on how much it costs to process $20 in the case of Rosemead. This
We don't have it.
I can hand my copy out. What the chair is looking at is a letter that came out on Monday, and this is from the Department of Finance, and it's in response to Los Angeles County proposing an adjustment to the amount of RPTTF money that we were due for ROPS 3. And this is a part of the statute that asks the county to go back, look at what was done as part of ROPS 1. It's a reconciliation of ROPS 1, and the purpose of this is to try to grab back any excess money that we might have received during ROPS 1. And so LA County notified us and the Department of Finance that they recommend a downward adjustment. We responded back with a letter outlining 3 key issues, and that letter that the chair is looking at, which I've just passed out, is the Department of Finance agreeing with us, the Glendale Successor Agency, and a number of agencies to not adjust downward the amount of tax increment we are to get on January 2nd.
Well, we're blank with respect to the approved adjustment. Does that mean we're blank or what?
That means that it's not a downward adjustment. We are due what we requested from the Department of Finance. So
Can we all get a copy of the letter? I mean, I have not seen that letter.
absolutely, I heard Mr. Abkarian's request, and I will. Following this meeting, I will send you the 3 letters that we received from the Department of Finance.
With no disrespect to my esteemed colleague from the County of Los Angeles, how much was the downward?
Over $9 million.
It's
And Mr. Chairman,
right here.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is one of the assumptions that will have to be changed.
Correct.
Because we did not have that letter or that determination when the DDR was prepared. And so we had to take a worst-case scenario and say, we will be getting $9 million less. And that's what we reported in our due diligence review. Now that that letter is out, the determination has been made, that's what's causing some of the change in the totals in our due diligence review.
It just doesn't get any better, does it? I mean, it's more and more confusing because, and I'll bring it up again, how much effort does a city like Rosemead have to go through to justify $20? When we're talking about 11 million here in some cases and that.
Mr. Raggio, I wish I could answer the question for you. It'll cost them $20 to answer.
Well, and if they're late with it, there's a $10,000 fine. All right, I don't know if any of us are. Merry Christmas, all. Do we have any other board member comments?
Mr. Chair, this is a staff comment if there are no other board member comments.
And this is at the request of the chair to obtain a brief legislative update, and so Ms. Van Meiden will go over that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, as this is just under the staff comment period, there are a couple of new pieces of legislation that have been proposed. SB 1, offered by Steinberg, which is essentially a redevelopment 2.0. It's the equivalent of the SB 1156, which was offered earlier and did not receive approval. That is the Sustainable Communities Investment Authority, with the ability to have certain limited powers that are similar to what redevelopment agencies do right now, so we should stay tuned to that and moving forward. I'm sure there will be many more amendments, so I won't give a lot of detail on that. And the second one, which is interesting, there were a couple of bills offered in the last session, one by Steinberg and one by Wolk, and this was on the infrastructure financing districts, which is part of the existing law, but both of these new bills offer to amend that to make it a little bit easier. Existing law has a voting requirement that the SB 33 that was offered up by Wolk, the new version, eliminates the voting requirements, would allow a new infrastructure financing district to issue bonds on a majority vote, to enter into joint powers agreements, to offer financing for construction of projects within the district. And then there would be a public accountability component of that. So I also recommend staying tuned to these 2 new bills, which will hopefully provide some tools moving forward as we are in this the new normal of this new economic development era. That's all I have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dick?
Well, I did want to point out in going through the letter, there are approximately 50 cities listed and only 11 were given passes. And so I do want to commend the staff for that.
Thank you. And you'll provide copies of this to everyone. Okay, thank you. I don't need one. I have your good news already. We have no need of a closed session, do we? And new business. Does anyone want to take a last kick at the finance department?
I think that carcass is now pretty well dead.
Yeah, that horse has had it. All right, then I'll have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And I want to wish everybody happy holiday and a Merry, Merry Christmas.
Same to you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.